Right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on storytelling with data for HR and L&D. Before we go too far, can somebody say in the chat whether they can hear me and see me? Anybody? Yep, cool, excellent, good. So, quick intro for me, for those that don't know me. I'm Alan Walker. I'm a talent person, specifically TA by trade. Since turned webinar host, blogger, event MC, which sounds far cooler than it is, and talent technology consultant. I'm also the founder of Chat Talent and of Udder, which is a talent tech consulting business. I'm delighted to say that this is our most popular webinar yet. To have over 1,000 people register for the event is just phenomenal. Thanks to all of you for that. I'm blown away, to say the least. Before we kick off and I hand over to David to introduce himself, I'd like to give a big thank you to Avado Learning for sponsoring today's webinar. Avado are the leader in the EdTech sector. They've been working with HR and L&D teams to reskill company workforces across the world for more than 15 years. And Avado's offerings include complete data and digital transformation programs, professional services certificates, data and digital apprenticeships, and a full suite of other data courses for everyone within an organization. So that's enough of me. It's nearly time for David to take center stage. We're very keen for this to be as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions, pop them into the Ask a Question section, not the general chat, and I'll pick those up. I'll keep an eye on them, and I'll ask as many as I can, either as we go along, if there's a natural break, or I'll save them until the end and ask David at the end. So that's enough of me, as I said. David, over to you.
Thanks, Alan, and apologies to everyone. I can't quite have the wallpaper that Alan's got behind him, which really is very, very colourful. So welcome, everyone. My name's David Green. Some of you will know me from the articles I share on LinkedIn. Others may know me from some of the conferences that I speak at around the world. I do have a day job as well. Like Alan, I'm slightly reinvented from what I did in the past. I actually have a background in talent acquisition as well. But in the last 5 or 6 years, I've been heavily involved in the people analytics space. So I'm a member of the board and a partner at Insight 222, which is a firm that helps organizations and specifically their people analytics teams have more impact with people analytics within their organizations. My HR Future, which you can see the logo there, is the B2C part of Insight 222. We're a website where we share blogs and videos about some of the future skills, should we say, and knowledge areas that HR professionals have told us that they want to learn. And we'll share some insights from the latest survey we've done on HR skills of the future during the webinar. So that's a website, myhrfuture.com. There's also an academy on there, and that academy is very much focused on the skills that I'm going to talk about later, including people analytics, which obviously is going to be the main part of the discussion today. We're going to cover 3 areas. If anyone has problems seeing the slides, and just let me know in the chat. I think they're coming through okay. So we're going to cover 3 areas today. We're going to do a little bit of background about people analytics. We're going to talk about why it's important and also the business value of people analytics. We're going to provide some case studies of how organizations are using data to drive business impact and employee experience within their organizations. And then the third part, we're very much going to look at the skills of the future from the survey that My HR Future has done over the last couple of months. And with the report is just about to be released. And you'll see at the end of the webinar, there is a link where you can register and you can actually receive that report when it is published. So let's crack on. So let's start with people analytics. Why it's important and what is the business value. I think the first thing to say, and maybe that is why there's been quite a lot of interest in this particular webinar, people analytics or people data was the #1 global trend, according to the Deloitte Global Human Capital Trends report, which is published every year around April time. And last year, people data was the #1 trend. I think there was around 11,000 people responded to that particular survey. So for someone like me who's kind of been in the space for 6 or 7 years, it was quite nice to see people analytics, people data finally at number 1. It had been kind of languishing around number 7 or number 8 quite regularly for the previous years. I think it really shows how people analytics has moved from a kind of nice to have, sitting on the periphery of HR with a team doing some experiments, to a team that really is focusing on helping HR drive more impact within the organization. We hear lots of stuff around employee experience. We hear a lot of stuff around tech that helps personalize employee experience, and also things like learning and internal mobility. And you can't do any of that without people, data and analytics, which I think is why we're seeing that shift towards the center of HR strategy moving forward. So long may it continue that it will be the number 1 trend. And I think it will certainly be in there in the top 2 or 3 this year as well, when Deloitte announced that. Perhaps not surprisingly, as people's interest in the topic grows, we're seeing more and more organizations now creating people analytics team. You'll see, in fact, in all the slides where I've got a source, I've actually written what that source is. This is a study done by the Corporate Research Forum that was published in November 2017. And they found that 69% of large organizations, and they judged a large organization as being 10,000 employees or more, now have a people analytics team. I still think some of those teams are probably just doing reporting and they've just rebranded themselves as people analytics. But what it does show is that the ambition is certainly there, and certainly a lot of organizations have really created these teams probably in the last year or two, and are trying to play catch up with some of those organizations like Unilever, like Shell, like Google, like Facebook, that have had these teams established for quite some time. Interestingly, a number of you that will be joining the webinar will be from smaller organizations. This isn't just about larger organizations. LinkedIn did a study last year, and again, they actually used LinkedIn data to arrive at this. I'm going to actually give us a link to in the next slide, actually, where you can find that information. But one of the questions that they asked, or they answered in this survey, was that they found that 22% of organizations are now doing something in the HR analytics or people analytics space, which I think is about right, 1 in 5. And some of these organizations and some of the organizations that I work with are actually quite small, with just a couple of hundred people. So, as long as you're focusing on business challenges, you can help solve some of those business challenges by using analytics. So we've also seen not only are the number of organizations doing analytics, perhaps not surprisingly, the number of professionals that are actually involved directly in HR analytics or people analytics is increasing as well. So again, LinkedIn did some research and they based this on profiles on LinkedIn. They did 3 regional reports. The number you can see there is for the EMEA region. And in a calendar year to May 2018, they saw a 61% rise in the number of professionals who cited HR analytics or people analytics as a skill on their LinkedIn profile, which is quite a significant rise. They also did regional reports in Asia Pacific, which you can see on the right-hand side, and also North America on the left-hand side. They actually did the study over a longer period of time in those 2 regions, but again, they saw a significant increase in the number of people who cited these, as I said, analytics as a skill in their profile. And that's certainly in the people analytics teams that I'm working with. I'm seeing these teams being created, but I'm also seeing some of these teams have more and more people. Some of the organizations that I'm working with now have 50 plus people in their people analytics team, depending on the scope of what they do. So yeah, it's certainly something that's growing very quickly within HR. And it's perhaps not surprising, we're kind of moving now towards the kind of business value part. Again, looking at some research, this is a report that Accenture published earlier this year. They actually released this topic at Davos, and I've got some more stats from this coming up later in the presentation. But what was really interesting here is they found that business leaders recognize that some of the new technologies and sources of workplace data can be used to unlock value within the organization. And interestingly, Accenture took this study a little bit further. Number one, they found that 92% of employees are actually okay with their organizations actually mining their data, as long as they get personal benefit from it. And that's where the whole trust part, obviously, of this comes in. And you'll hear things around privacy and ethics as well, which are, I'd say, top 2, top 3 issues within people analytics. And again, they actually looked at what would happen if organizations could unlock this data. What is the value that could be generated? Accenture's study looked at the top 600 publicly listed organizations in the world, and they found that the combined value was around $3.1 trillion, which is a very large number, of course. And I think all of us that work within our organizations would really like our organization to unlock that share of their value. So that is by putting trust first and foremost, and by looking at employee benefit as well as business value that you can generate with analytics. If we look at some of the stats around there about business value, the number on the left is some research that I've presented quite regularly actually over the last few years. So this is by Nucleus Research. They're looking at enterprise analytics, so they're looking across the business. So this isn't just people analytics. And knowing the amount of challenge that we get within people analytics, within HR, around how we can actually, everything that we invest is actually deriving value. There's a very interesting return that you get 13 times for every dollar invested, which is quite significant. And interestingly, when Nucleus had done this research previously 3 years before, they found that the value return was around $10.66, which for those of you who are British, 10.66 is quite a number that's quite memorable for us. But they cited three reasons why for the increase. Number one was the number of people coming into this space with the skills to actually start mining data and doing analysis on it. Number two was the amount of data we're creating. There's a number of stats and research out there that will tell you that we're generating multiple amounts of data than what we used to, both within organizations and outside organizations as consumers. And number three, the technology that is available to start analyzing this data is getting better and better. So for example, we now have the capability to actually look at unstructured data as well as structured data within HR, and a number of organizations are starting to do that. So for example, as we see how engagement surveys are changing, organizations are actually starting to mine some of the text comments in there as well to get more insights than they perhaps get from some of the traditional methods in which we surveyed employees previously. There's a number of correlations out there as well. These are correlations, not causations, for those of you that understand that terminology. But it's quite interesting. A number of studies out there that show that organizations that have quite advanced capability within people analytics generate higher stock prices, a higher return on equity, and higher profit margins as well. So that's why you've got CHROs, CEOs that are getting more interested in people analytics. When you put this in line with the change around how we want to, we want consumer-like experiences as work. So we want stuff that's personalized for us as well in the workplace. And the only way that you can personalize stuff for people is by using data. And also, if we look at our organizations, we're in a period of, I hate to use the word disruption, but we are in a period of disruption and change. And organizations are almost continually reinventing themselves and transforming at the moment, coping with new entrants coming into their market, coping with traditional competitors as well. And there's a continual pressure to design new products, new services. And obviously, you can't actually realize these strategies without having the right talent in place as well. So increasingly, business leaders are seeing that people analytics is actually key to unlocking productivity within an organization, but also boosting performance. So, as I said at the start, I've kind of been working in this space for around 6 or 7 years. And as I said, I left IBM about a year ago now and joined an organization called Insight 222. And as I said, we work with organizations to help improve their capability in people analytics. And one of my colleagues there is Jonathan Farrar, who I work with at IBM, but actually was the person that set up the people analytics team at IBM from 2010 and then ran that team for 3 years. Between us, we've probably worked with, over 100 organizations or so together, well, not together, but individually and together during the last 5 or 6 years. And we found that when we're speaking to people analytics leaders, people analytics teams, or HR leaders looking to increase their capability within the analytics space, we found that most of the questions we get fall into 3 categories. Number one is, how can I improve my impact? So my impact as a people analytics leader, my impact as an HR leader by using analytics, my impact even as an organization by using people data to try and solve business problems. How can I create more value and measure the value of the people analytics projects that I'm doing? And what should I focus on? Those of you that are on the call who work in people analytics teams and start to have a little bit of success within the organization will know that you get a flood of requests coming from the business. Some of those requests aren't necessarily going to derive business value. They might be just a request from people for data. And also in terms of actually building capability, should you focus on building the team? Should you focus on buying technology? Should you focus on using new types of data? These are just examples of the types of thing that you might want to look at. There's lots of things that you could focus on. So what should I focus on? So about a year or so ago, Jonathan and I sat down and started thinking about all the organizations that we'd worked with and some of the capabilities that they had in common. And although I don't think there's any organization that we've worked with that is excellent in all 9 of the categories on there, we found that there were 9 core categories, I'd say. 3 of them found in foundation. I'm not going to go through all this model now because we don't have time on the call, but 3 models in foundation in terms of governance, how you set the function up and how you manage things like ethics and data privacy and data security, having the right methodology. And I'm going to walk through an example of that in a minute. How you manage the various stakeholders within the business, not just within HR, but also outside HR. So that can be other functions like legal, finance, consumer analytics that you might want to leverage data and resources from. That could also be your customers with business leaders and employees and works councils. Then there's a whole thing around skills, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. The technology that you're using, both again, how you can actually capitalize on some of the technology investments that you've made as an organization that you can potentially use within your people analytics function, as well as the specific HR technology that's out there at the moment. The data, whether that's HR data, business data, which you certainly need to use as well if you want to solve business problems, other organizational data that you haven't particularly used before, such as email data. Organizations are particularly looking at that, some text analytics from surveys. And then it's all around value. So we're going to talk about that in some of the examples. So yes, it's about generating business outcomes, but also about generating workforce or employee experience as well. And then about creating a data-driven culture, both within HR, but also from the business as well, around using people data to solve business problems. And those of you that are interested are either part of People Analytics team. There's a short survey that you're able to take. The link is there. And it will give you an idea of where you are today and things that you might want to focus on. I think that survey takes about 3 to 5 minutes. So it's a simple thing. It will spit out an automated response to you. So yeah, that might be of interest. So that's kind of looking at business value, looking at some of the capabilities that you need to really be excellent at people analytics and be successful with that and develop the capability. But I think in terms of bringing it to life, let's look about how organizations use data to drive impact. So firstly, there are a number of ways. These are just some examples of some of the typical projects that I've come across within that organizations have used to drive value from people analytics. And I've split them there by business outcomes and people outcomes, although as you'll see from there is quite a lot of crossover. So again, I'm not going to go into each of these because we're going to talk about some specific examples with particular organizations. But you'll notice that some of those business outcomes are things like sales effectiveness, operational performance, better workforce planning, customer loyalty, etc. These aren't the typical things that we talk about HR. So I think really it's important. One of the most important things around people analytics is really to focus on the business question that you're trying to solve. It's not like starting with the data. If you give some data to an analyst, they will find something in it, but it might not be for something that's particularly important or relevant to your organization. So as an example, I worked with when I was in India with IBM a couple of years ago, I went to see a very large organization over there. They had everything in place that you'd want for analytics, a CEO that was passionate about analytics, a very large enterprise analytics function, a very good analytics leader. They'd done lots of work around operations and finance and thought it was about time they did something with people data. They didn't go to the business. They didn't go to HR to find out what were some of the business challenges that they could potentially solve. They looked at what other organizations had done, and they found that actually a common business problem that people get started with is attrition, because it's a problem for many organizations, and you can actually demonstrate the ROI on it. So they spent 6 months pulling together various data sources with using historical data, and they were using that data. They were able to predict flight risk by around 85 to 90%, which is really, really good. They were quite proud about that. They perfected that algorithm. They tested it. They went to the business. They went to HR, and no one was interested. And that's when they found out that attrition in that particular organization was around 6 or 7%. So it just wasn't a business problem. So again, that's the important thing about really starting with the business problem. So some examples of that. So funny enough, we'll start with attrition in an organization where it was a problem. So Nielsen, large, and again, all these case studies that I'm going to talk about are publicly available case studies, and the sources are there if you want to delve into them a bit further. And I'm going to send Alan a video of this case study as well that he'll be able to send out to people afterwards as well. So at the time when that Nielsen was setting up a people analytics capability, they didn't have a people, well, they had their people analytics function was quite young. The person that actually went to run the people analytics function had previously run the business for Nielsen in India. So he'd come from the business and had spent 20 years working in the business for Nielsen, running country teams. So he had a really good understanding of what the challenges were facing the organization. He moved across to New York. And the first thing he did is he interviewed business leaders within the organization to understand, A, what were some of the challenges that they were facing from a business perspective, B, obviously to talk to them about the potential value that people analytics could bring. And the idea of that was to find an initial project where he felt he and his team could have some immediate impact. And he was speaking to one lady that was running a consumer business unit within Nielsen in the US. And she said to him, I think we've got a problem with attrition, and my business is directly working with our customers, and I think it's affecting our business. So one of the first steps around this is, yeah, that's great. So that gives you something to work with. How can I actually frame the right business questions that we can potentially answer around analytics? So the team came up with 3 factors that they felt that they could answer using data. First one was, what factors make associates or employees, as they are there, more or less likely to leave the organization? What could we do about it? And thirdly, what was the financial impact within this particular business unit within Nielsen? So they pulled some data together from various different sources, HR and business data, and they found that in this particular business unit within Nielsen, a 1% increase in attrition cost the business $5 million. So going back to this business leader, do you want me to do further investigation on this and try and get to the root cause, i.e. answer the business questions 1 and 2 there? Yes, please, she said. Please, can you go ahead and do that? So in the next stage there was actually to again work with the business and speak to people within the businesses to try and build some hypotheses as to around this might be happening, and then use analytics to actually answer some of these questions. So when going out to the business, they found that some of the 2 main hypotheses were that women and female employees in this particular business unit were more likely to leave than men. So they thought, okay, we can test that by using the data. The second one was that employees that work remotely had a higher attrition risk than employees that work directly from a Nielsen office. And again, that's something that they could test with analytics. The great thing about people analytics is you can prove or disprove particular scenarios. And in this one, they found that actually male employees in this particular business unit were just as likely to leave as female employees. They did find a positive correlation between those employees that work remotely had a higher propensity to leave than those that work directly from a Nielsen office. But what they also found was something that they hadn't expected. They actually found that employees that had been in the same role within Nielsen for 3 years or more had a 48% more chance of leaving than those that had been in role for less than 3 years. So actually the problem that they identified was a problem around internal mobility and a problem around talent reviews with senior leaders. They actually had these HR programs in place, but they weren't being very well utilized. So again, a mandate came down from senior leaders that, number one, that talent reviews would be incorporated into every review with a senior leader. And they really started to go out to employees within this business unit around the opportunities within Nielsen. And if you were an employee that had been in role for 3 years or more, you were able to opt in to a program called Ready to Rotate, and you would be pushed relevant opportunities by your geography, by your skill set, by your career interest, as to try and reduce this interest and create that mobility within the program. And in the first 6 months, they reduced attrition significantly within the organization, but I think it's by around 3 percentage points, which obviously you can do the maths, was a value of $15 million a year. What they did really, really well, and this is something that's very much linked to the storytelling part, is they created a video to actually promote these programs within the employee base as well, that really really talked to employees around some of the opportunities that were available and how people could make themselves, stick their hands up effectively and get access to some of these opportunities as well. And a good communication program around by senior leaders. And what this did is it created momentum for people analytics within Nielsen. Other business units in other countries wanted to opt into this because attrition was also a problem for them. And actually, it helped build the people analytics function within Nielsen, and they started working on other business challenges facing the organization. And I think this was because they selected the right first project to work on, and that's a really important step. So that's one example. Second example is Virgin Media. So this is a good example of, number one, really relating a hypothesis, a feeling that someone within HR had, some intuition as it were, with a real challenge or business problem facing the organization, and actually leveraging some skills and some data from outside HR, and actually having an impact on candidate experience. So again, this is a case study that's available on the HR open source site. A very good case study. It's a nice long case study, about 4 or 5 pages long. And they had a hypothesis in a recruiting function that they were providing such a bad candidate experience that people that were applying, who were customers of Virgin Media, were actually having such a bad experience. They were leaving, they were resigning, as it were, as customers and shifting to one of their competitors within that space. So they took this hypothesis to the consumer analytics team, and obviously the consumer analytics team are there to drive things like customer loyalty, customer retention, customer growth. And they said, would you like to test this hypothesis? We've got our recruiting data, but obviously we need to marry that with the consumer data you've got to see if our hypothesis is correct. So they said, yes, this is something that we'd be clearly interested in studying. They found that actually over the course of a year, 7,500 customers that had applied to Virgin Media for a job had resigned from they'd resigned from Virgin Media as a customer within 4 weeks of being in the recruitment process, which is a pretty strong correlation, and suggests that recruitment process really wasn't, as the hypothesis suggested, providing a great candidate experience. With this particular insight, the recruiting team were able then to get budget to completely redesign the candidate experience. And they worked with a company called PH Creative in order to do that. So 2 things about that. Number one, they redesigned the candidate experience very much from the viewpoint of what it was like to be a customer of Virgin Media as well. So quite clever, and really putting potential candidates in the footsteps of what they would be doing if they ended up joining the organization. And they didn't just look on it as a way as to preventing existing customers from leaving by providing for such a great candidate experience. They did some academic research as well and looked at, if you provide a great candidate experience, how easy is it to convert non-customers into customers by providing such a great candidate experience? And based on some of these academic studies, they found that there was an opportunity of £5.6 million a year as well to do that. So what I really liked about that was, A, as I said, they leveraged data and skills and from outside HR. B, it's clearly a business challenge that the organization is going to want to solve. And C, they didn't just look on it as a way of saving money. They looked on it as a way of creating revenue using HR and the recruiting process to do that. So again, another nice example. Third example is around engagement. Obviously, engagement is a space within HR which is really being reinvented in many respects, and people are moving or augmenting away from a once a year or once every 2 year kind of engagement model to more continual models where they continue looking for feedback from employees and looking at driving employee experience, but also getting insights that can help derive business value. This interesting one from Clark's, really, the CHRO at Clark's wanted to understand whether employee engagement was a leading or a lagging indicator with business performance. And there is academic research out there that says it can be a bit either, depending on the organization that you're in. Within Clark's, they found, particularly in relation to their stores, that for every 1% of employee engagement, it was a leading indicator towards business performance. So 1% increase in employee engagement led to a 0.4% increase in business performance, which actually, when you look at that over a year, based on the annual accounts from 2016, was a potential 68 million uplift in revenues, which obviously is a very big number. So again, armed with this insight, what they did then was they did a further study to understand what are the let's look at our high performing retail stores, our medium performing retail stores, and our low performing retail stores. Great thing about retail is you can actually compare different levels of store. They found two key drivers of engagement. One was around the spans and layers within the branches. So i.e. the more people that reported into a single manager or unit manager within the store, the less likely engagement was to be high. So that helped them actually look at around how they design their stores from a management layer. And two was around the tenure of the store manager. So again, this helped them look at how they actually looked at moving their store managers around, because typically in retail, you will move a manager from a high performing store into a low performing store to help drive additional revenue. They found that it was actually having a negative impact on engagement. So again, it helped them really evaluate how they wanted to, as I said, move managers around. But I think a really big thing here was that they really were able to understand how important engagement was within their store network, and again, design HR programs and training and learning for existing managers, prospective managers, and unit managers within store as to how to drive engagement with their retail staff. So again, a great insight that helps improve business value, but also actually improves employee experience as well within retail. And again, retail is a good place to do analytics because you can really get at that value, because a lot of your employees are directly touching customers and are effectively revenue generating. So that's more of a traditional engagement linkage analysis, I guess. Now, I used to work at IBM, as I think I mentioned at the start, and IBM has had a people analytics team in place since 2010, and it's certainly one of the more advanced people analytics teams I've seen out there. And what they're really starting to do now is using a foundation of data analytics to help drive and personalize the employee experience. So again, IBM co-created a performance management system with employees, but they're also looking at technology to personalize things. So the example you've got here, and again, there's a link there to a recent study that was produced in the MIT's, the MIT Sloan Management Review, is around how you personalize things like internal mobility. So again, if you're an employee within IBM, almost in exchange for sharing your skills, your experience, and also where you want to take your career within your organization, you can be pushed relevant opportunities that you might be ready for now. And there's an opportunity there in the second slide, a potential job opportunity based on the skills and capabilities, geographic priorities or preferences rather, and you can click on that and you can apply straight away. It also tells you how much of a match you are to that particular role. Let's say you're looking at career pathing and you're not necessarily ready for a move now, but you want to understand what roles you could be available for in a year's time. You can see which roles that you potentially are a high fit for now, but maybe only a medium fit for. And then you can actually have learning courses recommended for you, which you can learn. And then obviously that will then potentially increase your fit for that as well. So it's great for the employee, because rather than having to look through a static kind of training manual, and if you're working in a big organization like IBM, there's a lot of potential training courses you could do. You're actually having stuff recommended for you, and actually really tying that to where you want to take your career within the organization. And then from an organization's perspective, in exchange for effectively helping personalize things like learning journeys and careers for employees, you've got that data to actually support things like strategic workforce planning and understanding the skills that your employees have got to support that, and understand where you can grow people within the organization and where you might need to look outside the organization as well to actually hire more people in. So again, this is kind of where people analytics is going, and we're seeing more and more of this from organizations moving forward. So that's a few case studies. We're going to look now at some of the skills that HR needs to be successful in a data-driven age. And as I said, this is based on some recent research that we did at My HR Future, where we effectively crowdsourced from HR professionals themselves what are the skills and knowledge areas that they want to develop. So just to put this into context, really, again, this is from the Deloitte Human Capital Trends report of a couple of years ago, but there was a real focus around digitization in this particular report. And I think the key line here is the second line around how HR is being pushed to take on a larger role in helping organizations to be digital, not just to do digital. So this isn't just taking analog HR processes and making them digital. This is really an opportunity to use the technology, but also have a different mindset, to be perfectly honest, and actually redefine your processes, but actually use things like design thinking. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well, but actually developing employee experience programs where we work with and for employees to design employee experience rather than doing things to them. So this kind of one-size-fits-all HR program that we've perhaps had before using some of the technology, we're now actually looking at not quite one-size-fits-one, but obviously stuff that's far more personalized for employees with better UI and everything else, which is quite a sea change from where we are at the moment. And to be honest, quite a sea change from some of the HR technology that we previously bought. If we compare some of that technology to some of the technology we use as consumers, it's very, very different. We're seeing some of the new breed of HR technology, which is far more interactive, shall we say. But it's not just a technology thing. It's a mindset thing as well. What does this mean? It means that HR professionals are having to develop new skills and new knowledge areas that are perhaps different from the ones they've learned in the past, and are perhaps different from some of the HR certification courses that you can do out there from some of the the well-known HR bodies that we all join as HR professionals. So we actually crowdsourced this. We actually did it, partly through my LinkedIn, but also some of the other people within the business as well. And we basically asked people, what are the HR skills of the future? What are the skills that you believe? And there were some free text answers, and there were some where you had to select from a list. It was quite interesting, actually. So we actually, these were the 6 key areas that were identified through the research where HR professionals themselves said that they wanted to build knowledge. And you'll see that there are some harder skills there, like people analytics, but you also see there's softer skills such as stakeholder management and consulting and influencing. And within the consulting and influencing part really is the storytelling. So how do you tell stories with data? How do you, maybe as a recruiter, how do you use some data insights that might talk to you about location analytics, where you might want to have a conversation with a hiring manager about where you might want to locate that new team, which might be in a different location than the hiring manager thinks where you should locate that. And maybe you've got some data that supports the fact that you might want to base that software engineering team, for example, in Austin rather than San Francisco. The actual pool of talent might be a bit smaller, but the actual competition and demand for that talent is a lot less. And maybe you actually don't have to pay people as much and you get better retention and everything else. It's a very different conversation from the ones that we've had in the past. And as you can see, obviously there's a big interest in terms of learning around digital HR and some of the new technologies that we're able to use nowadays, but also some of the new methodologies in stuff such as design thinking as well. So if we look into the bit more detail around this report, and as I said, all of this is available in the report when it's published, we found that 96% of respondents said that they strongly agreed that people analytics was a skill or knowledge area that they needed to develop, which is quite a large number. And you can see going down there from, I think, the 12 areas there, that most of the skills were all skills that people wanted to develop, which I guess shows that there is a real thirst for learning new skills and knowledge areas within HR. We did ask an open text question, which is, if you could develop one skill in 2019, what would it be? And again, people analytics came out far and away as the top. But what was interesting is those 6 skills that I presented at a couple of slides before, they account for 81% of the free text comments. Now that amounted to around, as I said, about 350 responses. We had a total N number of around 450, I think, people responding to the survey. And it was interesting that, as I said, nearly over 80% of the comments fell into these 6 particular areas. Now, a lot of people are going to say, okay, David, what was in the other category? So that seems fairly significant. So the other category amounted to around 16-17% in total of the respondents, but there was actually 45 different topics in there, hence why it was grouped as other. The none one made me quite interested. Okay, it was quite a small response. I'm wondering if there are just a handful of narcissists within HR that think that they don't need to learn anything. Maybe Boris Johnson and a couple of his fellow Brexiteers responded to that one. Sorry, I'm British. There has to be a few Brexit jokes at the moment. We're all having to cope with that in our country. So if we move on to people analytics, as I said, that moved into that there was by far and away the biggest area where people wanted to develop their skill area. These are 6 skills that we see from research that we need to have within a people analytics team. And you see that a lot of misnomer that I speak to is it's all about data science. Now, data science obviously is very, very important, and you can't do analytics without having people that can actually do the analysis. But you can see there are many other skills that make up, the people analytics team will need access to. These skills don't necessarily all have to be within a single people analytics team, although the bigger teams probably will have, access to all these skills within a team. But maybe you have access to these skills elsewhere within HR. So human resources, I would hope that, a people analytics team would have access to those resources. And I'm thinking about some of HR business partners in particular here, and other skill areas within HR. I'm also thinking around some IO psychologists that we typically find based within HR as well, mixing the qualitative with the quantitative skills that you get within the data science teams. Now, the 3 skills that coloured in green are quite interesting. So these aren't just particularly relevant for people analytics leaders. I think they're particularly relevant for HR professionals as well. Being a bit more confident, shall we say, using data with the business. So there's business acumen. So actually understanding basic things around how does your company make money? What is the strategy of your organization? And what are the people levers to actually help realize that strategy? These are skills that definitely we business, not separate from them. And that's having good internal awareness around how things get done within your organization, but that's also external awareness as well, of understanding, who are your competitors, what are they doing, who are the new entrants within the market, what are some of the trends within your sector as well, and then applying that from a people perspective. Having basic financial literacy and comfort with presenting numbers, again, is something that every HR professional needs to have, and is something that perhaps has been underplayed in the past. Then if you think, we'll come back to the communications part in a minute, then we're thinking around consulting. So if you think about those 4 examples that I outlined, particularly the Nielsen example there, you saw how do you build hypotheses as to what might be causing a particular business problem, and how we can potentially test that with analytics. How do you manage the various stakeholders within the business? How do you identify a sponsor for a project within the business as well? If you're going to work on a people analytics project, every project should have a sponsor. And as part of that hypothesis building and problem definition with that sponsor is identifying their appetite to actually do something about it. So saying to them, okay, well, if any of these hypotheses are true, and we identify that using data, are you actually going to do something about it? Because that, again, as a people analytics team, as an HR business partner that's potentially working with the team on this, this helps you evaluate what projects to prioritize and what ones to maybe deprioritize. But the one in the middle is really important. So this is the communications part. And I hope when you saw that I presented some of those examples, I didn't go into the detail of the analysis, because although that's very interesting to analysts and more technical people, what you really want to do here around the communication part is, what is the business problem we're trying to solve? What are the hypotheses we had? What were the insights that we got from doing the data? And what are the recommendations that we feel that you should do to actually try and action these insights within the business and actually try to mitigate some of those business problems? So this is stuff around storytelling, and we'll talk about storytelling a little bit on the slide. Now, this is still using the facts from the analysis, but it's very much telling it in a way that compels people to take action. And if we think around how marketing tells stories with data, both within and outside the organization, it's learning some of these skills and applying them within HR. And I think every interaction that we have within the business is something that we can potentially be a little bit better at telling that story, to either draw information in or also to impart information out as well. So if we look at storytelling, and this is a shorter version of something that comes within The Power of People, which is a book that I highly recommend when it comes to people analytics. The book was partly informed by 60 or so interviews with HR practitioners, people analytics practitioners around the world, and really learning some of the techniques that made them successful within their organizations. So if we look at there, again, if you're telling a story, any story, you've really got to look at the audience that you're working with. You've got to understand what are the things that are important to them. And that might take a little bit of research beforehand. That might take some initial conversations to understand, what are the levers that you need to drive through with these people to make them take action on things. As I said, it's explaining things like the context of your project. So from a people analytics perspective, what is the business issue that you're trying to solve, why it matters to the organization. That might be showing people what the cost is, or what the business opportunity is, or how it can help realize the strategy within your organization. Again, talk about the scope. Is this a specific business unit within the organization, which it probably is, to be honest with you. Don't be afraid to use emotion. If you use emotion, you'll draw people in. Potentially develop as it says there, develop a bond with your audience. And it helps personalize that story perhaps as well. And using personas again is a good way of doing that. Again, if we learn some of the skills that marketing are using, reveal the conflict. Talk about what would happen if we don't take action on this insight, but also what could happen if we do take action on this insight as well. So again, all what you're trying to do again with that is trying to compel people to take action. And again, that's sort of the whole thing around there, a memorable message, changing that memorable message for your audience, or if you've got an audience of multiple stakeholders, maybe refining that message 2 or 3 times so you're really touching each of those people that potentially are going to take a decision on that. So that's just a kind of real high-level deep dive into people analytics. Hopefully some examples that are useful for people, but also a little bit around some of the HR skills. And it'd be interesting to hear from what people who are on the call think about some of those skills and the ways that they're developing those skills themselves. These are some resources that I have highlighted. The Power of People is a book. The Data-Driven HR from Bernard Marr is a book, and the Storytelling with Data by Cole Nussbaumer is a book as well. So obviously they are all investments. What I've tried to put there is research that you can get access to online as well, i.e. the Deloitte Global Human Capital Trends Report, the latest ones, but actually looking at some of the ones from previous years are also useful. The Corporate Research Forum study that I mentioned, and studies from the likes of IBM and Mercer. There's lots of stuff out there that you can use. I write quite a lot of articles on LinkedIn. I collect every month a collection of the 10 to 15 best articles around people analytics and the future of the work from the previous month, and summarize those. And people tell me they're quite helpful, so I'll keep doing that whilst people keep saying that. There's lots of free stuff out there that you can potentially use. And we have a newsletter via My HR Future. You can subscribe via that link there. And we're doing that newsletter on a weekly basis. And Alan, you might want to talk about the Avado.
I can tell you what I know,
Academy
certainly. So, the Data Academy has been set up really to help boost exactly what it says there, that data culture, capability and confidence, not just within HR and L&D, but actually across the wider organisation. People always assume that HR folk are behind the curve because everybody's doing this stuff in finance and ops and sales. Actually, that's not always the case. And that data literacy piece and capability confidence sometimes needs to be driven through the wider organisation as well. So the Avado Data Academy was set up to support that. Okay,
over to you, Alan, for the questions.
Absolutely. Let me just put us both on screen and you can stop sharing now. You should see our faces loud and front and center. So we've had a lot of questions, actually. We've had 19. And the beauty of Crowdcast is it's fairly democratic. So we've had votes for these questions. So we can work through them in order in terms of where they've been and what's voted for, who's voted for what. One quick question I wanted to ask you, though, David, was what are your thoughts around kind of HR and L&D professionals bringing in outside support, outside suppliers, etc., to help them drive the impact of data into their organization?
Well, I think we can all learn from what happens outside our organization as well as inside. And I think, having been working within organizations, sometimes you can be a bit inward focused. So I think certainly, you can learn what others are doing. The people analytics community itself is very collaborative. So I've just come back from a conference in Barcelona, for example, and I was at Unleash last week. And I do find that people in this space are very willing to share stories, but also wanting to learn as well. That kind of exchange, I'll give if I receive. And that's certainly something that we're doing with Insight 222. In terms of bringing in, people that can help learn some of these skills, again, I think that's a good idea, because again, people that can offer the perspective of several organizations rather than just one, I think is helpful. But I think you can learn from elsewhere in your organization as well. I mean, one thing about HR effectively being the last major function within the business to really grasp that being data driven and using analytics, you can learn from your marketing function, you can learn from your sales function in particular, because ultimately they're looking at people. The people happen to be customers. But you can apply some of those techniques to employees as well. So yeah, I see a real thirst for learning within HR professionals, which is good. And I think, you can learn from outside. Excellent. As well as inside.
Right, let's get to some of the audience questions, and I'll start with the one that's had the most votes. I don't know whether you can see those your side as well, David, but this question's from Christina. She said, the examples you're giving are about one-time projects. So this is the case studies I believe she's referring to, that the people analytics teams have performed. Those should have a clear beginning and an end, making them easier to manage. Is there a different way to organize how a people analytics department functions, or is it always on a specific project at a time?
No, it's both. It can be one-time projects, and I think the Virgin Media one is an example of that. But I'd say the Nielsen one is a continuous thing, because once you've created a flight risk algorithm, for example, you're continually testing, validating that, and refining that. And you're probably using it continuously within in order to understand attrition and drive it down. The IBM example I gave around, that's effectively creating products. So those products again are continually being used to personalize learning, personalize internal mobility, and certainly seeing a shift, I'd say, in people analytics teams from focusing on one-time projects to actually developing products, analytics-based products. Both from outside suppliers, but also companies developing themselves, sometimes in partnership with suppliers to actually, as I said, analytics-based products really that are continually being used. So yeah, it's both.
Excellent. All right, we're going to power through these, and apologies if it feels like we're rushing. We've had so many, I want to get at least 3 or 4 answered. So the next one is around recruitment. So as a recruiter, me and you, both from that background, how can you use or leverage data to support your recruitment process to make better decisions and use the data to manage expectations with hiring managers?
Well, as you'll know yourself, Alan, you can use data throughout the recruitment process. We're seeing organizations using things like they're using data to effectively source, automate things like sourcing, create shortlists. We're seeing, I'd say the biggest use of data within the recruitment space is actually using external data to understand the supply and demand of talent in particular job families, in particular locations, understanding your competitors, for example, whether they're hiring or not at the moment. And there's a number of products out there. LinkedIn Talent Insights obviously is something that was released last year. There are other products from the likes of Talent Neuron, which is now part of CEB Gartner, and also MZ out there looking at labor market stuff. So I think particularly in the recruitment space, looking at external data sources to do that, but also looking at things like, I don't know, let's look at, if you're hiring a lot of salespeople, looking at the characteristics of salespeople to understand what is successful within your organization. Are there patterns on where you're hiring people from? So it could be from other organizations, it could be educational backgrounds, it could be pretty much anything, to be honest with you. I've seen organizations that have more successful employees that live within an hour of within the office. I think the key thing is, whatever insights you derive, you want to test and validate those findings before you start rolling it out blindly across the recruitment process. And you want to make sure that you're minimizing bias rather than exacerbating bias. So there was that famous case study last year from Amazon where they found that their hiring algorithm was actually exacerbating bias. But actually, hats off to Amazon for actually testing and validating that and actually taking that algorithm away. I'm sure there are many organizations that are using these algorithms that aren't actually testing or validating them. So,
which is kind of scary.
It is kind of scary.
So another question here from I'm assuming a frustrated candidate to a certain extent. So I have seen and applied for many vacancies in people analytics within Europe, and almost all of them require data scientists, while HR experience is listed as good to have. Do you believe a data scientist with zero HR experience is capable of performing a people analytics role?
Yes, depends what type of the role they're doing. I mean, you saw the six skills. You know, as a head of people analytics or as an HR leader that's building a people analytics function, you want access to those 6 skills. So yes, if you're hiring a data scientist, that person doesn't necessarily need to have worked in HR. It's probably easier to teach them HR than it is to teach them data science. However, there are a number of other roles within those 6 skills, such as consulting and the HR stuff as well. And actually, it is helpful, very helpful to have people that have HR backgrounds to actually work, particularly in those consulting roles, to help them maybe understand the business challenges of the organization, who can actually, HR business partners, for example, who I've seen go into people analytics teams to almost be a business partner for that analytics team. So, yeah, there are opportunities out there. You have to look few and far between. But I know several organisations that are hiring people that in a consulting capacity, effectively within a people analytics team. So yeah, keep looking.
Well, I'm gonna call time to a certain extent. We've got 3 minutes, and I just wanted to wrap things up. What I will say to everybody, me and David will try and come back to you and answer as many of these questions. Offline or online, whichever the best way is doing this. We've actually set up within the chat talent community a special group for people analytics and data. So do try and join that. If you see at the bottom of your screen, there's a call to action button. If you follow that and join that group, me and David will be on there at some point over the next couple of weeks, and we'll try and answer as many of these questions as we can, just to keep the conversation going. I'll also pop the link into the chat for you and include it in the follow-up email. So I think as we come to a close today, I just wanted to say one final thank you to Avado Learning for sponsoring this thought-provoking webinar. If you're interested in learning about their Data Academy and the rest of their learning programs, we'll be sending around an email that explains how you can get in touch with them. A massive thank you to you, David. The quality of content you provided today, and of course your exemplary delivery, as always, is really appreciated. We'll also be sending more. We'll also be sending around more information about David and My HR Future for anyone interested in that. And of course, a big thank you to everyone who's turned to watch this webinar today. Without you guys, this would be kind of pointless. We'll follow up the slides and any other information that we've promised, and you'll be able to access the recording of this event through the same URL you used today. And then finally, again, do join that Chat Talent community app. This isn't a conversation that can be over in an hour. I think it's important we keep this going and we all learn from each other and expand on our knowledge. So with that, goodbye from me. Thank you, David, again.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Alan, as well. And thanks, everyone, for
Cheers, guys.
taking the
Bye-bye.
time.